Guys, so let's get started. The first most important step before creating the store, you can create it just with dried flowers, dried fruits, according to the principle as we have without a slab. But I, in any case, want it with a slab. I prepared this piece of nut. It is super tasty. When it is soaked in resin, all these veins look super beautiful, and I already have it calibrated. The bark is removed, cleaned, sawn. We choose a tree. The wood must be dried. This is probably the most important thing. You can turn a blind eye to calibration, to the shape, to cleaning, to grinding too. But if the wood is not dried and it is porous, it moves. It will just tear everything, your products. So drying is checked by us, quality manufacturers, quality sellers. Of course, first of all, they write numbers. This is dried wood of the species. When you look there, the sellers there will have different numbers. It will be the calibration and the size, the width, and exactly dried, drying, the amount of drying in the wood. Now, if your species, you took, I don't know, a countertop, an old one, sawed it off with oil and with lacquer, then we remove everything. We can't have anything on the surface of the wood because that's all, and it will peel off. And even if the resin holds really well, but if the lacquer leads oil, then all your work will be ruined. Further along the bark, if you have a tree with bark and you checked and the bark is straight, it sits well, it doesn't come off, then leave it. We will impregnate the wood in any case. The wood will be tightly filled with resin. But if it comes off in a ruin, then of course we remove everything. Clean it, clean the wood, polish the wood. If you want to make the ends, I'll send you a lesson. Look there is an independent formwork and I paint the ends. You can also paint the ends. There's a lot of all sorts of beautiful nuances. But here you still need to keep the balance in your hands because if you overdo it, then unfortunately it can aggravate the result. Next, I have this excellent mold from the Resin company, but you can perfectly make it yourself from the tape that I just suggest everyone to find. In a hardware store, there it is. And this is super strong self-adhesive tape. But we don't need self-adhesive. Any form can be created from it, meaning you take organic glass, lay out the shape you want on it, glue it with a sealant. You can also take plywood, glue it with regular tape, and stick this reinforced tape on it. But you should also know, the more of these DIY items, the more work you will need to clean the countertop. That is, if you make it from tape, then of course it has slightly overlapping edges. There, you will need to grind well. If you want it to be perfect with minimal work, then this is, of course, a mold. There are a lot of all kinds of molds, silicone, plastic molds for creating a countertop. If you plan to work a lot, then it is better, of course, to choose molds. Now drying, we dry the flowers in 3 ways: in silica, in the oven, or of course in the sun on our windowsill. In the oven, in the microwave, and I have a lot of video tutorials on. If you want to preserve the volume of the flower for volumetric filling, then of course it is best to use silica gel. You put the flower in and don't worry about it. If you want flat drying, then the book under the press between layers of paper. The main thing is to not collect flowers after rain, so that dry petals are when you collect. In no case should you injure the petals, because these breaks, creases, they will dry out later. You will not notice them, but then the resin will absorb everything into them. It will look like a crack. Here are my favorites. Now we will be with you. I always do it this way, because otherwise at work, one can get confused quickly and not execute as initially planned. I first deal with the layout, photographing as I please, setting up the composition, and then moving on to the actual work. That's why I'm now trying out my beauty. I'll pour one. Layer, arrange flowers, then I'll shade, and over a layer that is, in principle, the first layout, I'm content. I want more leaves, but I'll add the leaves, as I already said, on the second layer. I think I'll add these berries. So for now, I'll leave photograph and move on to the resin, move on to priming the wood. Guys, the farther it goes, my friendship with resin, the more I am drawn into all such hard, heavy work with wood, with saws, with grinding. I have a delicious piece of walnut here. Even though I previously wanted to get an oak, I have such an oak right with bark. We will do something, and next time, here's a fat nut to crack with this one with such an end. I'll clean a little more, but first I want a piece at the end of the mold with. Here is this piece. For this I need a jigsaw. Here is my baby, a toughie. Look, a jigsaw, a jigsaw. We saw, with it of course you can cut out a beautiful texture, yes, but at such a thickness it is enough. It is difficult and we have to choose certain files. Yes, there are files just for wood, and there are saws for open work sawing. In the hardware store you will find everything, so we load our shaitan machine. As I'm soaking my slabs, boys, I'm soaking them on both sides. Even if that side, which I will be adjacent to the layer of resin, I still impregnate it with liquid resin, resin for bulk fillings, medium, whatever you want, but liquid, it is larger and better absorbed, so it's better to make it liquid. Look, First I do on one side and wipe the ends, then when it dries I wipe on the back sides. Even if we know that we will have resin at the bottom of the filling, still the air can come out through the wood. The pores from below might give you bubbles. So it's better to take your time and do something beautiful on both sides than to rush and mess it up. That's the idea. One side then the other. So the second stage of pouring, look, we have several options to choose from. First, we pour face down, and at the same time we put the wood face down. While doing this, we control the thickness of the filling and make it acceptable, like 2 centimeters, 3 centimeters, whatever you want, because then we can cut off all of these protruding cones, protruding flower heads, and cover it with a finish and color background. Or you can do it face up. That means first a colored base is made, a piece of wood laid, flowers are laid on it. It is considered safer this way. Well, there's no chance to ruin anything, and you already see what you are pouring, and that's darkening if you want, in milk or in color, that is, according to whatever you like. But from an economic point of view, it's better to pour face down, but it's not safer. I want to pour face down. But the first stage for me will just be a transparent substrate where I'll lay my wood, my blind. But why? Because I want to make a darkening layer in the layer with flowers immediately. And if I immediately make a layer of darkening and put my wood in it, the color of the wood will change. It will soak up the darkening that I do, and I do not want this. So I make a small, thin, transparent substrate from liquid resin, so there are as few bubbles as possible without anything, and lay it out. I blind to it. In 4 hours, I'll start darkening my dry flower layout. So let's go. Lay out the resin slab, soak it on both sides, yes. Carefully pour a small puddle, remove the bubbles. Let's face our village and see how it shines in general. A beauty, so let's go, my good. All right, I laid it down. Let it freeze, guys. Look, I have collected such a fortune here. Now look, we remember, yes, that we took a composition for ourselves in advance and put it in our heads. Then another important advice, it will be a pleasure for your customer, a very cool tip for you. Look, in advance I poured these ingredients, well, apart from the sterlets, those dried flowers that I wanted and added in general to the album is just something that wandered into my head. And it helps, for example, I don't want to add a gardenia to the main table now because I don't like some leaves are soaked. But look, this strange thing that I wanted to throw away yesterday, I put it because of, it's a shame. The video doesn't convey, but it shimmers so orange, just like a fire. These pods, I also found them on the street by accident, collected. They look at the fuchsia pink they give off. That's why, before you make a large table, or generally make a table, pour into a small coaster, check the color combination, about the combination. Choose a combination of 2 or 3 colors in one composition, the less the better. You know, not because less, because we can't fantasize, but because it eliminates problems. The combination is further, that is better to choose. For example, I have Sterlitzia, the main character of this table. Yes, I go to Pinterest and choose an orange color, combinations. The first, what it gave, it's blue. I naturally took blue dried flowers, then it gave with purple. And you see, I have a lot of purple here and different shades of salad. So I chose for myself, I removed blue, I won't do blue. I left purple shades of pink, fuchsia, purple, added even more texture of orange and green. Everything will stop at this. That is the main color and 2 additions. Put this composition together. Now by toning, as I already mentioned, I want to create a hazy effect, so I'm mixing a small thick layer, thicker than the first thin layer we made. There will now be a slight haze. This shading spreads, this method of operation extends to milk, to the smoky effect. Here, look, on this coaster, I also poured the first layer very lightly. The second layer is darker. When I sand off the unwanted portion, I can either cover with dark or leave as stained glass. You will also decide for yourself if you want to cover the finish with dark, but before that we will still work on it. Now I have mixed resin for volumetric fillings, Art Pro, and I will color in the same proportions, adding 4 drops of obsidian, 5 drops of brown from Resin Art. Here we need to create a stained glass, darkened but transparent color. It should not be dark, opaque. You know, yes, it should be slightly stained glass. It seems dark in the glass, but look, you see, when I try it on a spatula, it is very, very stained glass, so mixed. Oh, what a delicious color. Then the bubbles won't be able to be removed, guys, because we have dried flowers and we can easily burn them. You can also sprinkle the corrector inside and then pour out the resin. So we also add resin. I have a crack here. I also supplement it. And since I have thick layer resin, guys, I don't put it right away. I walk around for about 40 more minutes. So guys, well, now the main characters of this filling are the birds of paradise. Look, guys, if you have voluminous flowers, yes, large buds, the bird of paradise, although it is voluminous, it is not, and not fluffy, not layered like peonies, roses. So before pouring, walk, drip inside where your voids are in your buds so that the bubbles do not come out into your filling. I will do it on my beauties in any case. I will pour it like this inside before laying. So white silicone brushes for greasing there with protein, for cooking, look at them. And they're also very cool for preparation. The wood is suitable. I grease the wood with it. Now here I have these purple spikelets. I want to put them in this crack, start with the largest ones, and then move on to the small ones. But if you have all sorts of things, first of all, before laying the butterflies, sprinkle it with hairspray or acrylic varnish so that it's small. But if you have all sorts of things like these, before you place the butterflies, spray them with hairspray or acrylic lacquer so it doesn't soak in. This is what I did. So you can place it anywhere, like here, for example. Now the other parts are bigger. I have these things, hairs, these look very cool, you just need to trim them. I also have a cactus, and I'm thinking I want to place the petals here. Well, that's it. We'll fill up everything and leave it to polymerize. Well, the final part, I'm mixing the resin for volumetric fillings. Now I'll fill it up to the level of the wood, not the height of the mold, and overlap. I'm not sure if everything will overlap because clearly some parts are sticking out, and I'll make it 3 shades darker than what I initially had because I want everything to shine brighter from the back. On the darker side, all the details will shine brighter. So into the filling. But it still needs to be stained glass on my part. I add a bunch of brown drops because I know that they are super subtle and super stained. They won't color as densely as, well, if there was a mistake, yes, right now I don't know how much you can see or not. But the pigment is about 40% probably stuck to the ends, and that's normal for pigment. So I always advise students to work in a transparent tube. So you can see what's happening, because if there's a solid bucket, then we don't even see that it's stuck there from the inside. So I also add drops. So about the question of compatibility of pigment and resin for volumetric fillings, guys, I've tried a super lot of everything, coloring, non-coloring, and advise you immediately before you will. Your resin for volumetric fillings, mix literally a gram and check the pigment that you want to work with, because the likelihood is very high that your pigment may not mix and will not dissolve in the resin. Why did the small amount work well in the arts, but it doesn't vary for volumetric fillings because it is structurally completely different. Not only is it super liquid, but it also, on its own, it doesn't contain density to dissolve the pigment. The pigment simply breaks into crumbs if it happened to you. Take normal fabric and strain the resin through it and take it. Paint another one with another pigment. Let's go. So super, totally ideal. Now the resin will release bubbles. It will give them away over several hours. This is exactly how thick layer resin works. It becomes as transparent and as clean as possible due to the fact that it hardens for a long time. And the polymerization process takes place through temperature, and the bubbles rise to the surface. So all day long, you can remove bubbles. Just make sure not to set fire to your remaining dried flowers sticking out. That's all. Now 2 days of agony for everything to harden, and the table will be ready. Then comes the finishing, grinding, all the dirty work and the legs. Now caramel edge, guys, this principle, which I'll show you now, works on tables as well as paintings and dishes. That is, everything is the same except for the nuances. Here we will have to work a little more on the edges and grinding, which is not necessary for paintings and depending on what kind of paintings, but definitely not necessary for a dish. Look, what does caramel edge mean? Caramel edge, imagine a candy. Yes, a lollipop. It has streamlined, tasty, smooth all. But to achieve this in resin, the most important obstacle is for us. In addition to those that the resin should be, what kind of grinding? The most important obstacle is a sharp edge, a sharp end. Then there is, even when you paint at the initial stage, you already take a canvas, you take a stretcher, peel off the edges, smooth it slightly so that the resin can spread and catch in these edges, so that the surface continue down on the tables. This is the most relevant because the table has very tasty wide ends, especially this. If with dried flowers, this is generally the most ideal option. As for me, you can also polish in. The principle is the same, that we now grind to the coating with resin, finish, caramel edge, lay the resin, and then you can polish this table. That is in principle as if you were just a little steps to make it easier for yourself before polishing and after finishing polishing. That is, you can also polish, but now the story is about the caramel region, which you can apply to any of your own products for a painting, a panel, a watch, for anything you want. So we remove the sharp edge and continue sanding. This also applies to pictures of dishes. We must sand the surface, we must level it, and the sanding must be grain. If for paintings, you can take 2 sheets of sandpaper, for example, 320 and 380 to 400. That is, in your mind, up to, it should fit that we sand to the finish line to 400. In the sanding of the countertop, of course, we go from the lowest grain, but there it all depends on how much the surface is damaged, how much formwork you used. I work from 80 grains to 400 in stages, now if we have our own machine. Yes, the sanding machine. Look, when choosing discs, sanding discs, you must first of all carefully. When choosing discs, don't skimp. You'll spend more money and effort and nerves when you economize. Your low quality grains, look, they consist of fine sprays, granular, a square centimeter. It's along with the less or more grains per square centimeter. This is called grits. We need to increase these grits per square centimeter stepwise each time we polish. As polishing progresses, we move from the coarse grain to the finest until there's no disc left in the plush. Felt in a polishing paste. This is how polishing is done. There are no magic tablets that will make you polish like this. And if you hear about courses offering a perfect polishing method, they will only show you how to change the disc stepwise. But of course, they will tell you the subtleties so that a good, flavorful, beautiful, clear polishing is done without unnecessary scratches. We select grains, we carefully pick through them by hand, scrutinizing each disc. If it is from a high-quality brand, yes, there will naturally be faults. Sometimes there are faults even with high-quality brands. However, as a rule, everything is relative to the price. And we check our discs manually, observing what's happening. Why do we do this? If you have a cheap disc, these grains that are sprayed here, yes, the grains chip away when our machine starts moving on its own. It tears off when our machine goes along its trajectory. The torn grain also begins to create its own pattern, but only much deeper because it's under the sheet, under the emery sheet. And as a result, more scratches appear, which should not be with this grain and which won't be removed with the next finer grain. Understandably, that is, at the stage of disc selection, it's very important. You should choose your discs carefully. Then after each disc, now I will go through the 80th disc, clean the surface well. That is, the same thing happens. If you do not remove the dust after each disc, then this dust also creates extra scratches that are not removed by the next grain, the next grain. That is, I have the 80th, the next one will be the 100th. The 100th should only remove and smooth out what the 80th did. It can't remove what a larger grain that fell underneath you did. That is, you have to understand this. On your table, when you are working at sanding before coating with a finish or covering with a parallel edge, you must hold the discs in steps, those that you will use. Here is my collection. You should have napkins, wet, dry with acetone, with solvent, any. The main thing is that they clean well. You must have a machine, of course, and a brush with which I clean the disc after sanding. That is, we also need to sand and clean the disc before moving on to further sanding. That is, if you see that the disc is clogging, stop, clean everything off cleanly, and continue sanding. So if this principle also works with sheet sandpaper, if for those who don't have a machine, you do the same. You buy sheets, you get them step by step. The process takes longer, that's for sure. I highly recommend getting a machine if you intend to work for a long term and not just create countertops, but also make paintings. Sanding is basically suitable for a small coaster. As soon as you feel the smoothness of the sanding on the countertop, on the painting, on the coaster, you will realize the gap between just covering the coaster with a finish and a finish that is sanded to perfection or polished or coated with a MAC. It's a completely different texture, it's a completely different story altogether, and you must make your customer fall not only in love with the design, but also with this tactility. That is, resin products are certainly beautiful in photos, but they don't convey even 50% of their tactility and depth. You need to convey that through touch as well. When your customer touches your coaster, your dishes, your watch, your table, they will order a bunch more from you. So, where do we start? We start with the 80 disc. Now I am going over the entire surface. For now, going over the side beads. Note my movements. My movements are horizontal, clear on the surface as my vibrating machine goes. Then I also position it exactly to the side. I use the nozzle not flat out, like so with the entire disc. Firstly, the vibrating machine's design allows it to move in not only a circular motion, but also vibrate a bit. It vibrates, and if you use it flat, the machine and your hand will have a shaking motion that could tire you out. However, if you angle it like this, applying a bit of pressure with the nozzle, it provides a better grip, and the disc operates more directly and removes the debris more efficiently. The whole edge is leveled. But when we are working with the caramel edge, we clean our countertop, making it level, and we polish our edge, it also becomes level. You'll get virtually, well, you have a 90-degree angle.
It's level.
We do not require this angle here, yes. So the third step is to clean our machine. After processing the edges, we are now smoothing the edge with our machine. As shown, you can simply lay it on its side and roll along our edge line or carefully follow these movements, swings and lead. Our machine all over the edge, you do as you can. Because the swing isn't always perfect, this doesn't always turn out perfectly. I occasionally hold it like this, maintain my machine and hold my circle. I start to wheel it. Yes, wheel the tabletop itself relative to mine. Try different ways. The important thing, of course, is not to apply too much pressure, because you have to ensure everything is equal, should also be the same, and the height of the smoothing angle must be the same over the entire surface. Let's go. So take a napkin, wipe it off, guys. Now everything is the same that we went through with the 80th disc or with the one you started with. We repeat the exact same steps up to grain 320, or ideally 400, but 320 will suffice for covering with medium resin, medium viscosity. Everything remains the same. We go through all the discs, the top part, the ends, smoothing. No, don't be lazy, don't skip the steps, because it will all manifest on the flip side, well, the appearance of the marks. Don't be lazy to remove the dust and don't rush. Take everything step by step and let's move on to the finish coating. Guys, when we got to the 320 disc, well done. Then went on to the 400th in general, a Smart 5. We take a remover, a solvent, a liquid for nail polish remover, acetone, and the most delicious and my favorite, we remove all dust. At this stage, some bubbles may open up. Dust might be stuck in there from the sanding. Cracks might appear. Look, if crack bubbles appear, clean the bubbles with a toothpick. In the same acetone, you can clean it with water, then dry it. If you have an opened crack, I take as I act. I take UV resin. I have a small manicure machine. If there's a Dremel, take dentist's attachments and buy these small nozzles with not strong holes, not strong notches, not with deep ones because wood resin and wood get really stuck. We drill our crevices, pour UV resin in there, dry and grind, that is at the sanding stage. You'll see everything, preparing to apply the finish. Look. We have several ways of developing events here. We've sanded the front side. If you have your back side is very dirty, then it needs to be sanded. Remove excess leaves and also cover any small one, art, anyone. If you have a normal one, pour to the top up to the volume as it should be, like mine, then we can cover it with latex. Or I've observed a lot of Europeans, artists who cover it with glue for office use. It's called like this, but I didn't find such. That's why I use regular office glue that I bought. PVA glue, I have construction and office ones. I will try an office one. In 2 layers, you need to apply a thick layer in general. That some artists do differently. Some apply a very thick layer and leave it to dry for several hours. I will apply one like this. The left one is office, I'll apply it. Oh, the left is construction one, and the one I have in my hands is office. I'll apply 2 thin layers, the first layer now, and as it dries, the first layer, I'll apply the second layer. What this layer does, when we're going to apply the caramel edge on top, naturally the drops will flow down the sides, and to avoid having to regrind this surface, if you've done it well and don't want to have to cover it again, you need to protect it. You can use latex, you can tape everything up, or you can apply several layers of glue like this. When the drops fall, it hardens like a film. You just tear it off and it tears off together with the drops that remain from the finish. So now I'm applying it, I leave it to dry well, then I flip it over, knead it. Right now at this stage when I apply the glue, I'm going to stir the resin. I'll do it, guys. You also have a choice. You can make the finished medium thick or in principle as liquid, but liquid is the most brittle. I don't recommend. And I will make the finish with the same resin. Not construction, but for three-dimensional fillings. So that is, I'm going to do the finishing coating with the same resin I used to make this table, but I'll cheat, I'll add a little more hardener, and my resin in 4 to 5 hours will already start to polymerize. Because as we all know, resin for three-dimensional fillings polymerizes longer than artistic resin, and I have to wait. And I'm going to create a caramel edge so you can watch and decide for yourself how you want it. Maybe you want it medium. If that's the case, we wait for the PVA glue to fully dry before we mix the resin, be it medium or thick. So, guys, I already have the resin mixed up. Now, how do we create the caramel edge? We can allow the resin to thicken up a bit before pouring it out immediately. Creating a tape wrap is a safer option. Grab some masking or reinforced tape, but not the regular kind. The regular tape won't stick. I have formwork tape. Tape it up, guys, to ensure it's easy to remove later, but also well adhered. The tape should naturally stick well. Give about a ½ centimeter edge. I'm applying it with a stretch. Why do we need this edge? That's because we're going to fill it up with resin and we don't want it to run down instantly. Make sure to cover the edges thoroughly and let the tape adhere properly to avoid any leakage and stop the resin from running off immediately. Down and gained a little viscosity only after a certain time. When we already understand that it is ready, go down, we will lower it to our ends. Look carefully at the tabletop if you have removed everything. Is everything fine everywhere for us to spill our pitch now? I mixed the same resin, which poured the countertop. So now I'm going to pour it out little by little. You see, I divided it into a few cups so that it does not polymerize faster. I pour it into the center of a thick puddle. And the guys, to know how much resin we need of our work, there is a calculator for resin consumption. Art resin, the calculator is very close to exact. So I advise you to use it when you calculate your consumption, as on, add a little bit more, I would say about 10 grams. So the resin can still disperse calmly to the ends. It has now settled on the ends, and it's very good. Let it be like this for about an hour. I have it here. Let me remind you again, guys. I have resin for volumetric fillings. I added a little more hardener to it. It's a trick. And thus, my resin will harden faster than 2 days, but it will certainly take a day to harden, and it will begin to thicken and polymerize after about 3 to 4 hours. But to conduct such experiments, you must also experiment beforehand. So please, before accelerating your resin like this, you must understand it, know its lifespan, know how long it will take to harden before you can do tricks with it. In the same way, you can create thick or medium resin. But the main precondition for the finish is that the resin must be mature and lifeless. Yet many students make the mistake of insisting on pouring the resin into the mold as soon as it's ready. But it's already thickened and polymerizing. As soon as you pour it out, it will, when the resin touches something, there'll be a bunch of bubbles. So we give it we stir the resin. Let it sit right there. If we're talking about an artistic resin, we give it literally 10 minutes to settle, then wrap it in tape and pour. We wait right here, and check the viscosity of the tar with a toothpick. When it stretches like honey, we remove the tape and it spreads over all our edges. We help with our hands, a burner, a hairdryer, whatever you have, we remove the tape, the resin will spread, and it gives us a caramel edge. That's where the secret lies, but choose the right resin. I generally wait before removing it. So, guys, the most anticipated moment, we remove the tape. I need to shoot this part from another angle. Wait, here is the tasty bit. Let the resin spread. If needed, help it with your hands. Help it spread. That's it. Leave it to polymerize. And now, guys, look, a piece of advice. If you're going to cover PVA, try using construction glue. Experiment, dry all the layers. It peels off perfectly. But where the droplets were fresher, the glue itself smeared a little. And now the most interesting thing. I saw these legs once on a trip. We saw such a countertop in a rented apartment. But there the main stick was running along the left side through the tabletop, where the wood is. I remembered this design and decided that even the tabletop was born from these legs, so they turned out. They are easy to do, well, as I like from the side. My husband made it for me. I needed the details right, but the sticks are crossed at an angle and two beams are drilled into the tabletop itself. And now I want to see yours.